Every morning, the newspaper is delivered at your doorstep. A plane crashes into Manhattan's World Trade Center. Coup in Pakistan. Nobody killed Jessica Lal. The butcher of Mumbai guilty, and innumerable other headlines. Have you ever thought how these stories are laid for you? Ever wondered about the volume of and the number of people involved in bringing out a newspaper every single day? Well, in today's class, I will familiarize you with what goes in the making of a newspaper. But first, let us understand the functioning of a newsroom. Editing of news reports will be discussed later in greater detail to get a feel of that miracle that happens overnight. So, today's lecture will focus on firstly familiarizing you with the organizational setup of newspaper organizations. Secondly, understanding the relationship between reporters and sub-editors. Thirdly, understanding the nature and process of editing. Fourthly, laying emphasis on the art of editing. And lastly, attention will also be given to the legal aspects of editing. A newspaper office receives a large number of news items every day. Of the millions of events which occur every day in the world, only a small proportion become visible as potential news stories, and of these potential stories, only a fraction is produced as day's news in the media. Almost any event has the potential to be news. However, this diversity is not seen in the various media. The majority of stories reported in one news outlet are also covered by every other outlet, the only difference being the extent of coverage. An analysis of what actually becomes news shows that there are certain factors which consistently influence whether or not an event is deemed newsworthy. The geographical factor, the freshness, the human interest angle, the impact and the prominence of a news story do play an important role in the coverage of stories. It is important to point out that technology has played a major part in the way news is gathered and disseminated. Newsrooms have changed at a very fast pace. About 20 years ago, reporters typed their stories on sheets of paper and manually corrected their errors before handing over the stories to their editor. Today, journalists type their news stories on computers or on word processors and correct their errors instantly. All stories are then stored on system servers for subs and editors to work on. Everything is done electronically today. Newsrooms are the hub of all activity in news organizations. The editorial desk, also known as the editorial department or copy desk or news desk, is the nerve center of the newsroom. It is here that every day the newspaper issues are planned and made. The newsroom is headed by an editor or editor-in-chief or a chief news editor. The designation varies from organization to organization. He or she plans and directs the day's news operations. Now, newsrooms differ on various fronts. Some may be big, some small, some publish once a day, others once a week, some publish online, some others simply print news. While newsrooms may differ in size and manpower, the titles people have may vary, but the fundamentals of how a newspaper is published are the same everywhere. Reporters work in liaison with the news desk. Generally, they are fed or briefed about the stories they need to cover by the news editor. These stories are assigned by monitoring the news agency wires, press releases or the other media, maybe the online or the television, or are simply drawn from the news diary. News diary is a carefully maintained calendar of newsworthy events such as conferences, court cases, sporting events, concerts and parliamentary proceedings. The starting point is the story idea. The reporter may come up with one and may learn about it after talking to a contact, reading a council agenda, observing something on their way to work. The idea is then discussed with the chief reporter, whose job is to oversee the work of other reporters. Sometimes the chief reporter will assign one or more stories to the reporter. The chief reporter takes the day's story idea to the news conference. There are generally 2 conferences a day, one early in the day before work starts and one closer to the deadline. At the conference, the chief reporter joins the editor, news editor, web editor, picture editor and other senior staff to discuss the stories. The course of action for the stories to be pursued is decided here. Once the reporter has enough information and has checked the facts, it is time to file the story, and all this is done against the clock. Now let us learn how the editing process begins. All incoming news items, collectively called copy, are sifted before being processed to achieve a balance of news. Only the newsworthy stories are finally selected. They are checked for grammar, syntax, facts and figures, and are also shortened or increased depending on the available space. Once the stories are selected, the editing process begins. The objective of editing is to make the stories smooth for readers. The idea is to communicate news and information in the most conversational manner. Correcting stories is called editing. Symbols used to edit are called copy editing symbols. In other words, news editing is tailoring news stories to the required shape or size using the right kind of expressions and symbols. There are two kinds of editing, the mechanical and the intelligent. Mechanical editing involves the sub-editor to merely mark the editing symbols and dispatch the copy in the manner they receive it. Here, editing is merely an exercise of the hand. With computerization, the work of mechanical editing has become outdated. However, editing symbols that were earlier used extensively are still helpful in correcting copies that are typed on paper. This is the reference chart of copy editing symbols for print. In contrast, intelligent editing is creative. It is the sub-editor who is entrusted with this job. It involves a great deal of responsibility. Therefore, it should reflect a measure of wisdom in addition to knowledge and efficiency. Subs must use their discretion to recognize what is information, what the reader really wants, what is essential and what can be kept back for the next day. Every item, every sentence and every word in the paper is a conscious decision by the sub-editor. Although the mechanics of editing have changed radically in the newsrooms, the intellectual processes remain the same. This begins with copy tasting, a term used for sorting accumulated stories. A bulk of these stories are spiked. The amount of subbing differs from paper to paper and from section to section, but all reporters must accept that their copy may be restructured. You as a trainee reporter or a cub reporter might have your copy rewritten many times till you get used to the house style of the organization. Once settled, your copy will tend to be heavily subbed only rarely. Some reporters sub their own copy. They check it for style, clarity, conciseness, flow, punctuation, spelling and factual accuracy, etc. before passing it on. Reporters usually do not write headlines or put their byline on their stories. Editors write the headlines after working out the size of the headline and the location of the story on the page. The system followed in Indian newspapers puts the onus of selection or rejection on the chief sub. Copy tasting has a direct bearing on the richness of the newspaper's content, and it is only proper that this central responsibility vests with the person who heads the shift and is in charge of the edition. Here is a checklist for sub-editors. To communicate with the readers, the sub-editor must ensure accuracy by checking facts, see that the language is simple, eliminate repetition, adhere to newspaper's house style and traditions, give uncompromising attention to fairness, good taste and legal safety, check stories for word length, rewrite stories whenever necessary, either to combine several items for a composite report or to provide balance or to bring in background information, give appropriate headlines and complete everything within the deadline. Simon Irwin, editorial director of the Kent Messenger Group, says, "A blindingly obvious statement is that a news story should be accurate. This is one of the keys to the whole business. This cannot be overstressed. If it is not accurate, then it is not a news story, it is fiction. If it is fiction, then it must be in a bookshop with the Harry Potters, not in the news rack. Nothing dismays a reader who knows something about an area more than recognizing an inaccuracy. There is nothing more important to a newspaper than accuracy. Too many inaccuracies will destroy a newspaper's credibility, and a paper that has no credibility has nothing. Reporters and news agencies are supposed to consult back files and reference books to make their stories accurate in all details, but surprisingly, a large number of them do not take the trouble. The sub-editor must therefore check spellings, place names, contradictions and discrepancies. Sub-editors are encouraged to develop a habitual disposition of suspicion. Of course, every statement in every report cannot be checked. Experience and his own professionalism will give him the instinct to know what statements to suspect and what to pass. Many inaccuracies can be corrected by sub-editors themselves, especially if they are in the habit of storing information at the back of their mind. Subs must also have a set of books for ready reference. The list of books should include a dictionary, who's who, both Indian and international, and the yearbook. A clippings library arranged according to subjects and territories can be invaluable. Today, internet has made this process easier. The key to editing lies in making a sentence or an argument understandable to a reader. If you as a sub do not understand a sentence or an argument, the reader will not either. It is important to note that accuracy in news reports and the credibility of a newspaper lies in the eyes of a reader. This will depend on the sub-editor's alertness and his passion to get things right. This will also differentiate a good sub from a bad one. Now, those working on an English newspapers need to have a professionally competent knowledge of the language in order to do their job well. This principle applies to those working in other languages as well. The sub-editor, as a good communicator, has to master the language in which he functions. He does not have to be a writer to distinguish between the right and the wrong word. However, he must understand the linguistic nuances and use them appropriately. Interestingly, the difficulties faced by English newspapers are not a problem with the language press. It is well known how Tanti became the first mass circulation paper in India. Its founder, Adityanar, developed a people's language in his newspaper. Adityanar repeatedly tested difficult words on Atha, the office watchman. If Atha did not understand a word, it was changed or explained in simple terms. Others have proven the same principle without going to Adityanar's extremes. The late Santosh Ghosh was the prime force behind Anand Bazar Patrika's soaring popularity in the 1960s. The innovation that clicked with most readers was his colloquial language. It was an experiment in Bengali news media. Ghosh was a novelist in his own right and he popularized newspaper Bengali without compromising on the beauty of the language. In Andhra Pradesh, the story was repeated by Eenadu. It became the largest circulated daily in a short period by making people its focus. It used a language used by people in everyday life, in contrast with the traditional literary Telugu used by other papers. What these papers have shown is that writing simply and directly works best, and that this can be achieved without diluting the beauty of the language. The non-English papers have succeeded in showing the way because they are written by reporters and sub-editors who use the language in their everyday life. English, on the other hand, is acquired through formal study and can be literary. A conscious effort must be made to achieve command over the language you work in. To communicate effectively, you need to bear these in mind. Always prefer simple words and sentences. There is nothing that cannot be simplified. Now is always better than at the present time. Prefer short sentences. The trouble with the long sentences is that by the time the reader gets to the end, he forgets the beginning. The sub must insist on splitting long sentences. Always be sure that there is no ambiguity about the meaning of a sentence. A phrase in the wrong place, a wrongly positioned or omitted punctuation mark can alter the meaning of a sentence. Watch out for misleading juxtapositions. It is easy to confuse the difference between he can only sing and only he can sing. Always consult dictionaries and use reference books. It is the only way to avoid spelling mistakes and wrong usages. Smoothness and clarity can sometimes be jeopardized even by punctuation marks. It takes only a comma to alter the meaning of a sentence. For example, he declined to comment further adds UNI is very different from what was intended. He declined to comment further adds UNI. Hyphenation also deserves close attention, especially when words are broken at the end of lines in text setting. The usual rule that a word should be broken into natural syllables is a sound one. Like the hyphen and the comma, rules about capitalization are also much abused. In fact, proper capitalization is a key to easy reading. House styles may change from paper to paper. Some may put a book title in italics, some in quotation marks without italics, some in big and small capital letters. But there cannot be a style where a proper noun does not take capped first letters. Bad juxtaposition of words leading to confusion in meaning is another common occurrence in newspapers. The BBC News Style Guide says, the key to good writing is simple thoughts simply expressed. Use short sentences and short words. Anything which is confused, complicated or capable of being misunderstood risks losing the reader. And once you have done that, you might just as well not have come to work. Most news organizations have adopted the Associated Press Style Book and Libel Manual. The Style Book helps you as reporters to avoid misspellings and errors in grammar and word usage. In addition, the Style Book saves journalists time. By specifying a single set of rules for everyone to follow, the Associated Press Style Book also encourages consistency. A few large newspapers such as the New York Times and the Washington Post have published style books of their own. Tight writing not only saves space by economizing on words, it is a pleasure to read. The time-tested journalistic principle is that the sub-editor tightens what others write. Where journalistic criteria prevail, sub-editorial efforts at achieving tightness must proceed at two levels. Unnecessary words and redundant phrases must go first. Second, the sub should cut out thought sequences and ideas that are either irrelevant to the story or dispensable in the interest of space. They must be done away with. At both these levels, special attention should be paid to eliminating clumsy sentence structures and ensuring directness of expression. Sub-editors everywhere must consider it one of their prime responsibilities to cut out clichés like last but not the least. It may be recalled in a pool of blood. Pompous words like utilize, maximize, repetitious phrases like consensus of opinion for consensus, dead body for body, present incumbent for incumbent, true facts since facts cannot be false. It is common to run into loose sentences such as they had only 2 days left to make up their mind and come to a conclusion. Remember, you cannot come to a conclusion without making up your mind. The sentence is an obvious redundancy that needs to be tightened. In the organization of stories, ideas sometimes get repeated. Sometimes repetitiousness also occurs because of the placement of related stories on a page. In both these cases, the sub-editor must be alert enough to spot the problem and eliminate it. The average newspaper reader does not know about house styles. He never asks that this letter be capped or that number be spelled out. He is unaware of the rationale of stylistic integrity and the compulsions of typography, and yet uniformity of style is basic to editing. Sub-editors argue about it, fuss about it, because it has everything to do with making a paper easy to read, especially in English, which has words and idioms with a bewildered variety of forms and where irregular usages abound. If names are preceded by Mr. and Mrs. in one story, Shri and Srimati in another, and nothing at all in the third. The reader is not going to feel at ease. If Jaya Prakash Narayan later becomes Jaya Prakash Narayan with difference in A, and later still Jaya Prakash Narayan with the difference in I, the paper will not enjoy the reader's trust, because the confidence of readers is paramount, and because the items called for standardization are innumerable in a newspaper. Agreed norms of style and usage are considered essential for sub-editors in their daily work. Naturally, styles vary from paper to paper. Some may use the form Southeast Asia, while others may say Southeast Asia, and both would be correct. It is simply a matter of choosing one form and sticking to it, but deviation from some principles may definitely obstruct easy reading. These are mostly in the categories of abbreviation, capitalization and numerals. It is impossible for a newspaper to avoid abbreviations. However, it is imperative not to resort to obscure abbreviations. The simplest rule of abbreviations is that they must be familiar to all. Sometimes an abbreviation is known because of wide usage, like UPA. At other times, abbreviation will never become familiar enough to warrant regular usage, like EMRC for Maharashtra. Some may lead to confusion. WB can be West Bengal or World Bank. CBI, MP, UN, MGR, NTR are examples of initials that have acquired the familiarity over a period of time. You as a sub-editor must exercise your common sense, knowing that your aim is to avoid ambiguity of meaning. In English, the importance of correct capitalization is paramount. It is a key to easy reading. For example, both the I and the mind are used to seeing a person's name. For example, initials and the first letters are capitalized. The subbing of numbers may result in creating confusion. This is because universally all numbers below 10 are spelt out and all numbers above 10 are written as numerals. Stylistic rules like laws should be intelligently used, or they may become a hindrance to easy reading. It is necessary to have practices of standardization laid down in a body of house rules. Without these, intelligent newspaper editing is impossible. Any line or collection of lines of display type that precedes a story and summarizes or introduces it can be called a headline. Headlines are a means of grading and indexing the news according to their intrinsic importance. Now, for writing good headlines, you must know the story, have a good vocabulary that is both broad and deep, understand sentences and sentence structures. Now, some rules to be observed while writing headlines. Tell the story in specific terms. Tell the main aspect of the story most fully. Marshal the facts in a sentence form. Build the head around a strong active verb. Get the facts straight, get them right. Headlines are based on leads, not a rule, just a logic. Once the story package is compiled, the news editor assesses the story to decide whether and where to use it in the newspaper. They may re-angle a particular story, tighten up the opening paragraph, may send it for rewriting if they think it needs more work or if something new has happened since the story was written. The process of laying out pages was earlier done by hand. It is now done on computers, although some people still sketch them by hand to get an idea of how it might look. Either way, the principles are the same. Space is allocated on each page for stories, pictures, ads, headlines. The pages are drawn up by the designers under the direction of the chief sub. In editing copy, the sub-editor must ensure not only that a story is accurate, clear and readable, but legally safe to print. Production delays may be caused by a late decision to take a story out of page if it seems libellous, and this may cost money and lose sales. All newspaper companies retain a lawyer to copy and advise the editor of potential legal traps. If a story is considered unsafe to use, the lawyer, after consulting the editor or chief sub-editor, will issue a legal kill, which means that the story must be thrown away or removed from the file. If doubts about a story are not resolved while editing, the sub-editor should forward it to the legal person before sending the copy for print. Two thoughts should be kept in mind by journalists while considering legal problems in editing. One, that a mistake or a damaging statement in a newspaper gains more currency with the public than anything else and can therefore cause greater harm. Secondly, newspapers are often soft target for litigation. Finally, when the pages are signed off, they are saved as PDFs and sent to the printer. There, the newspaper is printed and bundled before being stacked in trucks for distribution by rail, air or road to depots, shops and homes. And that is how you find the newspaper in front of you every morning. These were some of the main aspects of editing. However, it is important to realize it is the sub-editor who is the image builder and protects a newspaper's reputation. He is the unsung hero who takes all the blame whenever faults are detected and rarely gets credit. He remains anonymous. Clearly, newspaper editors are laying more emphasis on good writing today than ever before. Recognition of news editing as a very important function maintains the good image of the newspaper. With this, I am sure that each one of you has become familiar with the functioning of the newsroom and of course aware of the magic that happens overnight in bringing the newspaper each day in front of your doorstep. I hope that all of you have enjoyed this lecture and understood the dynamics of editing. Thank you.